Okay, my name is Peter Clarke. I'm the editor-in-chief of Atheists for Liberty, and I'm joined today by James Cowell, who is the National Director of Campuses. Is that correct?
Yes,
Campus outreach, maybe.
I'm the national campus organizer, so I do all of the college programs for Atheists for Liberty, and I'm also Tom's personal assistant, so I do quite a lot of things for the organization.
Excellent. So we're going to be kicking off a new podcast of sorts here, and this is primarily going to be focusing on the content that comes out of the editorial board from Atheists for Liberty. So we're going to take a couple of topics that we have written about and just discuss them more in depth. The first topic that I want to jump into is an article that I wrote about a month ago, and the article was titled Atheism's Four Horsemen, an honest look at where they are now. And this was inspired by this article that was published by Evolution News, which is this, I believe actually like a Christian organization runs that. And they had this article, Atheism's Four Horsemen, where are they now? And it was like this super snarky article about Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Dan Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and it just took one little kind of petty snippet that's been trending recently about them. Like for Sam Harris, it was like, oh, he said something that was controversial on a podcast, ha ha ha, and that was like, so that's where Sam Harris is now, right?
Yeah.
That's just like, it was like so kind of pathetic. And so in my article, I went and did kind of like a more like honest, as if I were just like a neutral party looking at these four figures saying like, what have they done now? And it was kind of interesting. Like one thing that I found is that a lot of these guys have put out like multiple books since they founded the Four Horsemen thing in like 2017 or whenever it was. Actually, it was earlier than that.
It was way longer. Yeah, it was
maybe 2011.
2009, 10, and 11 were like the big years. Yeah.
That sounds right. Yeah. So a long time ago. And a lot of them had put out books that I didn't even know existed. So it's kind of fun to like go back and like see that. But yeah, what I wanted to talk about with you, James, was why is there so much just knee-jerk animosity toward the Four Horsemen and toward New Atheism more broadly? I kind of get it that this Christian organization, Evolution News, which is like an anti-evolution publication, incidentally, I kind of get why they would be. Yeah, I kind of get why they would be anti-New Atheism, but just kind of like broadly, whenever New Atheism is brought up these days, it always totally has a negative valence against it. Whereas like for me, I don't know, like I still have just I don't know. I like them all. I still find them interesting. I don't always agree with them. New Atheism, I consider it not dead. It's like had some weird iterations and parts of it have died for sure. But what are your thoughts on the whole New Atheism movement and why there's so much animosity towards it?
Well, I think one of the things that I really do think has sort of played negatively into the New Atheists' hands has just been sort of the audience that's been built up around the brand of New Atheism, right? For every person that would go to a lecture that Hitchens would do, or that Sam Harris would do, or a debate, whatever, especially back in the early days of the atheist movement, for everyone that was really intelligent, you'd also have the really snarky people who would go and kind of make fun of Christians and not really take anything seriously. They just kind of be like, rah rah sky daddy. And I think that's kind of been a bit of an issue, unfortunately for us. So I can understand some of their perceptions of us beforehand, but like you mentioned in for the website that you mentioned that was sort of critiquing Sam Harris being edgy, right? I think that's always like an accusation that just kind of falls on deaf ears, because these people built their careers, and we're talking about challenging the cultural zeitgeist that was being religious. So of course you're going to come off as edgy or controversial. Like, hello. I don't really know how you can get around that. I think on a political and philosophical level, the strongest critique I've ever heard actually came from Carl Benjamin, also known as Sargon of Akkad online, who said that the main problem was not the destruction of what religion was doing, not the truth claims about whether it was, right or wrong, but the fact that after the movement sort of dies out, they left nothing behind. There was nothing to build off of. So it's like you've torn down the church, you kind of rattled the state a little bit, but what have you left to replace it with? And then that sort of created the problem that we're in now. And I can at least see that argument, even if I disagree with it, you know?
Yeah, okay, I want to jump off of that a little bit. Maybe before I do, though, I do think that one part about the animosity is just that there's a sense that there's this political element to it, and all of the new
Yeah.
atheists are kind of like normie libs. Like, I'm kind of a normie lib, so like no wonder I am just like fine with Sam Harris. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I think that there's probably like a political element too that we could explore. But okay, to that Sargon of Akkad point, one, I get it. Like, I think that there is a sense that they did just like leave like a rubble behind or whatever. It didn't build anything. But like, counter to that, culture is rich and glorious and amazing. And you can take out one little part of culture,
Exactly.
let's just say churches, like, oh my God, there's still so much there. It's like culture, and like cultural naturally does replenish itself with other versions of itself. And so like for myself, I used to go to church twice a week growing up, and it was like a major part of my life. And primarily it was like a social thing, right? None of my best friends ever came from church, even though I, like, on paper had the most friends from church.
Yeah.
My best friends were from like soccer and tennis and debate club, etc. And like throughout my entire life, like it's on paper, church was like a huge part of my life. But really, at the end of the day, it wasn't what I was stoked for. It was just kind of like going through the motions. And I think that no one says that often enough, is that like, yeah, church is like totally cool place to socialize. But how many people there are just like awkwardly like doing their hellos and then just like sneaking away as soon as they can?
and that's totally accurate. I mean, I think even in the original conversation that kickstarted the name Four Horsemen, which was it was a 2-hour conversation between all four of the Horsemen, and Dawkins has them up on his YouTube channel. I strongly recommend anybody go check that out. It's very interesting and intriguing. All four of them do say that, you know, church, even if we do away with the truth claims or whatever, it does still serve some sort of a function as a place of gathering, but it doesn't mean that's the only place you can gather all of a sudden, or that, you know, that's where you're going to find all of your social outlets, or your personal convictions are not going to come from, you know, these things can serve a purpose, but stop acting as if it's the only place that you can get these things, you know. And like you said, you know, culture has multiple facets, and different iterations of it will pop up when necessary. You know, so I totally agree with you on that.
Do you think that the new atheist movement, in terms of the Four Horsemen, do you think that it even did anything in that? Let me just say, like, for myself, I basically was a non-Christian for several years, and then I read Sam Harris, and he just made me feel comfortable saying I'm an atheist. That's what he did for me. But it's not like that was a super radical shift for me. And I kind of wonder if, you know, the rise of the Nuns has been happening, and it happened in Europe decades before it happened in America. It's just kind of like, seems like this inevitable thing, right? Do you think that the Four Horsemen actually did anything to, maybe they put into hyperdrive in America a movement towards atheism, but do you think that we would still be at the place where we are now culturally without them? This is something I'm genuinely curious about. Like, sure, the books are great, but like, I do wonder if we would still have the rise of the Nuns without them, right?
So yeah, I agree with that. I think I don't know. I kind of think they did have a pretty huge part to play in it. I mean, if you even think about Atheists for Liberty, the group that you and I both work for or are part of, right? The reason why Thomas, our president and founder, started this organization was because of the convictions that were sort of pushed onto him and inculcated into him through discovering the Horsemen, and how he, you know, grew up in that sort of tradition, if you will. It's the same reason why I'm an anti-theist, not just an atheist, is because I was raised incredibly Catholic. I actually wanted to become a priest for a large portion of my latter adolescence. And after dismantling Protestant arguments, I said, okay, I haven't looked at any atheist arguments. Let me read Christopher Hitchens. I like his stance on free speech. Let me see what he has to say. And that was like, oh, damn. And everything changed. And that's why I am the man that I am today. And I'm sure that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of others who've said that. And even if it's just one person who changes their mind, you have no idea what one person changing their mind could set in motion. over
Okay,
time.
absolutely. No, I mean, I agree with all that completely. My one data point that's in conflict with that just a teeny bit is my wife, who grew up just without any religion, like heard about these stories, but just like meant nothing to her. And I feel like she's like super representative of maybe the biggest portion of what is the rise of the nuns. It's just like the people who went to church but didn't really care that much, and then you move that forward 2 generations, and that's most people,
Yeah.
then their kids just don't go to church anymore. And because of like, I don't know, there's so much to say about this, but we just don't need religion anymore, period. Right? Like we
I agree.
used
Yeah.
to need religion to explain the weather, to explain why people die, to explain consciousness, to every single thing. It needed an explanation, and there only was one on the table, and it was always religion or God. And we've just like one by one, we've scratched all of those
Yeah.
off. This is the whole like God of the gaps perspective, that like fewer and fewer things that explain of God. And I mean, there's like an emotional thing there that God offers you, but it's also kind of punitive seeming and kind of gross at some level. Like no one truly feels free to have the
Yeah.
idea that God is always watching you and judging you.
And I actually don't believe it provides anything emotional. I really don't think that. I think that when people say it does, I think they're coping more than they are real. And the only reason why I feel entitled to say that is because because I'm the kind of person who people have called me a seeker before, which profoundly annoys me because it's like I feel very firm in my stances and I'm willing to change them. But when I'm asking questions, it's because I'm actually interested in what you believe or what you don't believe, you know? And whenever somebody brings up the emotional side of things, it's much more of like, well, I don't know, I just kind of grew up believing it, so I don't really know if I want to change that, much more than like it actually provides some sort of like genuine comfort. It's more like it's comfort in complacency rather than like comfort of like love and joy is sort of what I've discovered most of the time.
I do think it's true, though, that for people who are in very, very hard circumstances, you know, recovering drug addicts, people who are in prison, supposedly there is a lot of meaning and value and emotional support that comes from religious stories. And my perspective on this is like stories are very powerful, whatever the story is. And maybe the God story can just be interchanged with another story like Marvel or like anything kind of. That's my perspective. But like, I don't think there's nothing there. I think like a story that says your life is meaningful and you are loved, that's a great thing. Like by and large, I just don't think you have to buy the whole thing all the way necessarily.
Yeah, I guess I should have said like it's not. I don't think there's nothing there, but I think like 75 to 80% of the time, it's probably the former rather than the latter. I would say, but I could be wrong about that though. And I think you're perfectly right too about how most of the Christian arguments today have either already caught up to what our arguments were 20 years ago, or are just the God of the gaps argument. How does evolution know what to do? I don't really know, but just because you have an answer doesn't mean that it's a good answer. You know what I mean? So that's kind of, I think, where we're at nowadays. Is there's like 4 or 5 different arguments, like where did everything start? How did we get here? And then how does evolution work? That's like people are still having, but it's not the same as like, actually, I think there's devils in the waterfalls, and that's why they fall a certain way, or things like that. You know.
God, life would be so interesting if that were true, right?
Yes, I used to think that all the time. Like, man, if D&D was real, that'd be so cool. But unfortunately, here we are.
So here we are. We're a couple of decades out from the founding of the Four Horsemen, and right now I think that we are in this time where there is this kind of like low-level animosity and maybe even a cringe factor to the idea of Four Horsemen, New Atheism. Mm-hmm. I think that's just kind of like a fact. But where do you think we're going to be like another decade out? Do you think that? I mean, my thought is that these 4 individuals and the people around them, right? I think that they are such just fundamentally great writers, great speakers, interesting thinkers. A lot of them have done way more than talk about just God, right? I mean, all of them actually have done more talking about non-God topics than the God topics. All of them, I think, are going to be remembered by history as meaningful figures in culture. So I think that by and large, they're going to have good reputations go, as once a lot of like the day-to-day politics that annoys people falls by the wayside. But yeah, what's your thought on their ultimate, or maybe a couple decades out, what their reputation is going to be like?
I think it's going to be pretty positive. I still think that overall, minus a few cases, it does seem to be generally positive. When you were to bring up, somebody like a Harris, or especially a Hitchens, somebody who's still seen as like, yeah, I remember that guy. He was pretty smart, at least, right? There still is some sort of positive elements, and I think that that's only going to increase over time, especially as you see people like, I don't know if you're familiar with Alec J. O'Connor, otherwise known as Cosmic Skeptic, online, that are sort of taking up a similar mantle to what the Horsemen sort of set in motion of like, now there's a new generation of people who are kind of falling into that role. I think that's only going to continue to be positive as long as we have good people at the forefront of what we call new atheism.
Right. Okay. So I want to move on to talking about Richard Dawkins specifically, because he was in the news this week, where he was interviewed by some channel, and he went on a little mini spiel about how he is culturally Christian and how he likes Christmas carols and he doesn't want to lose that, etc. And a lot of people were posting that clip online or on Twitter as kind of like a gotcha, like, haha, like atheism is so stupid. Even Richard Dawkins says that he's culturally Christian. And a lot of people, I saw some people associated with AFL, including Thomas, were, just kind of sharing it, being like, this is a totally nothing. Like, he's said this forever. I noticed Sarah Hayter also had a lot of comments similar to that like he's always said this, and like, kind of duh. My thought is similar to that. Like, I think that everyone who grows up in a Western or Western adjacent nation probably to some degree is culturally Christian. Mm-hmm. And that term to me is so broad that it just encompasses a little bit of everything. Like, if you participate at all in, maybe even you could bring it back to Enlightenment values, but certainly like holidays or traditional marriages or traditional family conceptions of like the family structure. There's just so much that the idea of the Christian story, it's just touched so much, and you almost can't get away from it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's just kind of like, you just want to have a culture, right? And
exactly.
Just because you're no longer believing in the fairy tale aspects of Christianity doesn't mean that you have to like knee jerk abandon every like little last item associated with it. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I totally agree. And that's another thing that I think a lot of people who are making this criticism or this claim that, Dawkins is abandoning atheism and he's going to Christianity somehow. A lot of these people just kind of don't know what they're talking about. I remember in the first hour of the Four Horsemen conversation, which I watched in preparation for this as well, rewatching it, all four of them once again say like, yeah, like my atheism is kind of a Protestant type atheism, or it's more Catholic based because like I kind of grew up here. And like Hitchens in his book says that like on Easter morning when he would go to like Greek Orthodox Mass, and people would say, Christos anesti, alethos anesti, Christ is risen, he's risen indeed. He would say like, I actually don't believe any of that, but I could certainly feel the joy and understand the tradition of saying it back and forth. And there's nothing shameful about that. That's perfectly fine, and there's perfectly serviceable things. And as you said, it's impossible to escape. So I don't really know what the big deal is. This isn't some sort of gotcha. This is just kind of like, we do live in a relatively strong Christian culture. So, I think if you were to take these same people and put them in a different region, their cultural persuasions would also change. So it's not like that's a gotcha or a truth claim on whatever the culture, says it is.
Yeah, I almost feel like I would be more uneasy if I were a Christian and I saw all of my kind of like sacred traditions, sacred holidays being utterly fully co-opted by consumerism. I mean, I remember when I was growing up as a Christian, it was actually kind of annoying and actually kind of I could work myself into seeing how it's a big deal that Easter is literally just about a bunny and candy, and Christmas is literally just about presents and stupid songs. And I would listen to Fox News back in the day, and they would have their rants about how taking the Christ out of Christmas or whatever. And I would like get it, and I'd be like, yeah. And I feel like that is more of a an uncomfortable place to be in than to be in Richard Dawkins's place of I'm an atheist and that's cool, but like what my culture has built up around me over the centuries. Yeah, I feel like that's just like a more like a less ironic or problematic place to be.
Yeah, I agree. I share that opinion entirely. I think you and I were probably raised in similar environments if that was also your reaction, because I remember that was frequently on rotation during the holiday season, was taking the Christ out of Christmas. Calling it Xmas was a big deal. Like,
I remember that.
Saying Xmas, everybody was freaking out. Arguments about manger displays and what that would mean. I remember feeling quite annoyed because in my Catholic state of mind, I was saying, you're missing the point. But also, I think on the flip side, now as a secular person, shouldn't those people also, like the Christians, also be sort of glad that at least there's some semblance of their holiday still around, because it means they're still relevant rather than nothing at all? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those annoying things fundamentally about religion, is that we even have to bother talking about these things. Like, can we say Xmas? I mean, obviously people just do this. We make a big deal out of everything, and everything is just like tangential to gossip. We want to like our hot takes so we can gossip about it. So-and-so has their hot take and they're stupid. So I get it. But at the same time, like how much wasted energy, or like just take Fox News. Like Fox News, technically, I know they don't hardly ever talk about substantive things, but every year they still do the stupid Christ out of Christmas thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much time could they be talking about semi-meaningful issues? Even like tax policy or something would be more beneficial to humanity than talking about this all over again. And I know that, I've worked in media a little bit, and you do things on a recurring cycle, not because you even necessarily believe it, but because like, and the audience may not even like it, but it will get clicks or it will drive traffic. That's what they're doing, and it's so stupid. And I'm just like perpetually annoyed by that. We even have to talk about these things still.
No, it's just like a rotating door. I'm just expecting like it's gonna keep happening. So here we are again, and I'm sure we're gonna be here again come Easter next year and come Christmas next year. And that, I think the only thing that will change that is just the cultural connection to Christianity. As that sort of wanes, I think we'll slowly start more and more, those arguments will die down. But I agree. I think it's wasted time.
You know what we need? Honestly, we need more atheist holidays of things like the winter solstice, and the summer solstice. We should make those proper holidays. You get the day off work. We get some traditions around it. You do certain things like, I don't know, we barbecue for 4th of July, do something like of that nature for the summer solstice. That would be kind of awesome. I'd love to see like a movement around that, and not even call it like this is a secular or this is an atheist holiday. Just like, hey, this is a cool thing happening in the cosmos. Let's like take a moment to pause and reflect on the awesomeness of the universe in association with this cosmic thing. That's rad. I think that would be super cool.
Something to note, actually, in the Scandinavian countries, you are seeing a huge uptick in some of the old Norse paganism coming back, but also just your average Scandinavian celebrating things like Yule. Because it's a cultural movement of like, our people celebrated this way. This is a big part of what it means to be, genetically Scandinavian. This is a big part of our society still in some aspects, so we should celebrate it. And I think like that's great. That's an excellent example of like, it's much more tied to naturalistic events in the world than narratives, and we could still have, fantastic times and fun events surrounding these holidays that don't have to be tied to antiquated stories.
I like that. Okay, let's get that going in America. Let's get some paganism back.
Why not? Yeah. Make paganism great again. Why not?
Make paganism great again. So one more topic that I have today to discuss is I saw this on Twitter yesterday. Someone named Sola Requiem, I think it's someone I follow, but I'm not sure exactly who this is. They tweeted, "You can't be right-wing and an atheist." This is something that I've thought about a little bit, and I'm curious to get your takes on it. And Roland K, who's a writer for
Yes.
AFL. He's written a bunch of articles for us, and follow him on Twitter. It's Roland K1 at Roland K1.
Roland's great.
Yeah, he's great. And he tweeted, pretty sure I am, like right wing and an atheist. And I know there are quite a few right wing folks in the AFL sphere. I think you're probably one of them. I'm like more of a lefty, so I'm like representing like the leftist atheist. So I will give you the first word on this as someone who I think is more associated with it. So what are your thoughts on you can't be a right wing atheist?
Well, funny you should ask me that, because I'm actually I'm probably further left than you. I'm actually a democratic socialist.
Oh, really? I don't know why I was thinking you were.
Yeah.
Right,
so
okay, I got that wrong.
It's okay. Both you and I can and still have our inputs on it, even if it doesn't apply to us, right? Because we can't claim to be right wing.
I grew up right wing, so I can still like channel that, you know.
Yes, I was at one point I was a right wing atheist. Okay. I know. I think it's perfectly serviceable to be a right-wing atheist. I don't really know what believing in God has to do with, proposed free markets and expenses of certain personal freedoms at market freedoms. I don't really know what believing in God has to do with that general principle. So I think that's more of like an inculcation of like the Christian right in America specifically, kind of saying you have to be, Christian to be right wing more than it is like a statement of truth.
The one thing that I'll say is that, which I kind of get, if you are right wing, typically means you're conservative. If you're conservative, that means you are trying to conserve your culture as it is. The culture as it is in this moment is still pretty damn Christian or Christian-ish. So maybe truly it is a liberal impulse to take that like turn away from your culture. But at the same time, like right-wingism really truly is fundamentally, if you just ask someone, it's about small government and, gun rights and individual liberties. There's like a package deal that it doesn't inherently have anything at all to do with whether or not there's a big daddy God in the sky.
Exactly. Yeah. If we had the time, which I know we don't, but if we had the time, it'd be an interesting conversation to sort of go into like what the actual minute differences between right and left wing are on certain positions. I think you could still very easily make the case that neither side at any point ever required some sort of religious impulse. It just happens that at one point, religion sort of tied itself mostly to right wing politics, I think. But at no point ever was it necessary or really even totally included, because a lot of these things are about social and economic policy, not theological persuasion. That's why we have things like theocratic monarchies or that are theocracies that are not even really right wing or left wing. They're their own thing. People consider them their own system. So.
Yeah, I'm remembering that Coleman Hughes had on these two guys, these authors who had a book about kind of like deconstructing the left-right thing and saying that it's all completely nonsense all the way down. And I don't completely agree, actually. When I was listening to them talk, I was like, my brain was just like firing of like counterexamples. But they were saying like pretty interesting things. For example, abortion is a right-wing phenomenon now, but you can totally use left-wing words to make it a left-wing cause.
Yeah.
So for example, like it's all about the injustice to the underclass, the underserved, unborn child. Just like use some kind of like tangentially Marxist language to stand up for the person without the voice, the little like you can map all of like liberalism onto that cause. All of a sudden it absolutely sounds like a left-wing cause. And it's just kind of like it could be that way. There's kind of like no logical reason why, and that's maybe like a very hot buttony issue, but that applies to kind of everything that you can map on
generally, yeah.
The opposite logic onto the opposite.
If you look at a lot of, speaking of atheists, right, my favorite atheist is Christopher Hitchens. I know quite a lot about him, and I probably will become a biographer of his at some point because I just know so much about him. But one of the things that's interesting to see about his arguments is he comes from a Trotskyist background, but even he was anti-abortion for the most part. He
didn't know
didn't
that.
like.
Okay.
Yes, his general stance was that you should defend an unborn human life on the grounds that it potentially could become a human, in which case the potential is just as valuable as the actual life. And that's not a position just held by him. You know, I did a little deep dive into that to see who else had said that, and it's really weird how, as you said, things map on to their opposing sides, and you can make this argument for this side and this argument for this side, and then just with one switch of a sentence make them switch sides immediately. So I totally agree with you. I do think there is a meaningful difference, though, and I know that you had said that. For me in particular, like, economic policy is one of them, right? I don't think you can make redistribution of wealth ever into a right-wing
yeah. Okay.
point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
And you could say like, well, if you're doing it for only Americans, well, okay, maybe sure you can make some nationalist argument about that. But even at that point, nationalism isn't necessarily only a right-wing point either. So there's such like there's such a big difference there, right? But I do think there are some things that you know they don't map on to right-wing politics that you can't, and left-wing politics, vice versa. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. But for now, I think we got to wrap things up. So, James, thanks for coming on to the inaugural AFL editorial board podcast.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. It was good fun, and hopefully we get to do it again soon. So.
Great. And anybody out there listening, give us comments or any topics you'd like us to discuss or write about. We're always searching for topics over here. So, and thanks for listening.
Yeah. See you guys.